Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about parenting through the lens of attachment. And really, what I'm talking about is how we can, when we're making parenting decisions, big and small, how we can think about the process of attachment. And I'll go over some review for some of you in terms of what the research tells us about child development and about secure attachment to begin. But before I get into tonight's topic, I want to make an announcement. For those of you that are in our program, you know this already, but our online Finding You intensives are now available for all of our parents at no cost. So if you are a current parent and you want to attend a Finding You online, you can contact admissions at evoketherapy.com. If you would rather attend one in person, you can apply the cost of what the Finding You online costs towards the in-person intensive. So that's something we're very excited about. And if you're coming to this, I should say this very clearly. This is really going to be about you. I think when you're a new parent in this process, even when people ask you how you're doing, especially in the context of a treatment of your child, you'll immediately begin to answer the question in terms of how your child is doing. But that won't be the focus. What we'll be doing at all of our Finding Yous is helping you unravel your own childhood, helping you unravel your own programming, and really looking at your life, your history through a critical lens. That is looking at it through an informed lens, a psychologically informed lens. So, Finding You intensives online are now available at no cost for all of our current families, and we're very excited to be able to announce that. Contact admissions at evoketherapy.com or intensives at evoketherapy.com to find out more. Now, for some of you, this first lead-in might be a little bit of a review, but I'm gonna state this as the foundation for this evening's topic. We really do know two things pretty confidently from the research, and that is that the greatest contribution you can make to your child's well-being, and this applies both as a preventative measure for mental health, but also in the process of treatment. The best thing that you can do is to provide a secure attachment. That's a calm, consistent, attuned presence. Really being interested in what's going on inside of the child, focusing less on the good or the bad behavior of the child. So the secure attachment is the most valuable thing that you can offer your child for their well-being. But where it really gets interesting is this. The second thing that we know is the best predictor of whether or not a parent is or can provide a secure attachment for a child, this calm, co-regulating, nurturing, attuned presence, is how much work they've done on themselves. If they've done the work to look back, just like I was talking about with our Finding You program, if they've done the work to understand their own childhood, that self-awareness, that healing provides a base, a foundation to be able to provide the secure attachment. But what makes it most interesting, I think, and not intuitive, is that it's not really about whether or not you had a good childhood. I think a lot of people think of, I had a pretty good childhood. There was no big T or obvious trauma, and therefore I can provide a secure attachment for my child. But the research tells us that you still have to do your work. And if you have a bad childhood or a childhood filled with developmental, complex, or even big T trauma, you might think to yourself, well, I'm doomed in terms of my parenting responsibilities and tasks because of my background. But the research says that if you've done your work, that's the predictor. If you've done your work, if you're doing your work. And I said this in a recent broadcast that a lot of people have been sending in questions lately, and they know what my first answer or a foundational answer is going to be when I answer a parenting question. I'm going to answer with do your work. And people have preempted me by saying I'm doing my work. I've been in therapy for a long time, but it's still not working in terms of what's happening with my child. Let me be clear that the outcome of your work isn't that your child's behavior is going to change, and that you're going to find some new idea to be able to kind of go around the trauma with your child and get them back in line more in a mentally healthy place. That's not really what I mean. What I mean is the work itself is the reward. How it changes you, who you become is the reward. And then from that place, from that grounded, regulated, healed, connected, strong sense of self, clear sense of self place. When you operate from that base, that foundation, everything else works out a little bit better. Sometimes it can have a dramatic impact on your child and their mental health, and sometimes it can have very little in terms of the treatment later on in life. But that's the best thing that you can do. And most importantly, when you do your work, you're grounded, you're at peace, you're demonstrating vulnerability, you're demonstrating that you're responsible for your own well being. I think a lot of us, because when we go through a process where our child is struggling with, in some cases, some pretty scary symptomology, some pretty scary mental health issues. I think that we think that the cure to our lack of peace, our lack of serenity, our lack of clarity in our life is the child's behavior. If only we think to ourselves, if only the child could get within at least a reasonable bandwidth of healthy behavior, then I can sleep at night, then I can be okay. But that idea is where the flaw is. We have to, in our work, realize that we are responsible for our own serenity. Again, giving the foundation, a healthy attachment, generally speaking, is marked by the child feeling a sense of safety and that the child's inner world is valued more than their outer world. I love this definition by Amber Deslin. She said, secure attachment is the delicate tangle of feeling safe, interconnected, independent, and free. So, like I said, the conclusion is to do your work. But let's assume you're doing your work and you're on the track. Now let's talk about what it looks like and feels like, what happens when you're parenting through the lens of attachment. A couple of quotes, one from Daniel Siegel. If you want a reference for this, the next few slide quotes are taken from Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell's book, Parenting from the Inside Out, which is a great research-based foundation for the things that I'm going to be talking about and teaching tonight. Daniel Siegel says, research in the field of child development has demonstrated that a child's security of attachment to parents is very strongly connected to the parent's understanding of their own early life experiences. I'll tell you that when a parent tells me that, well, when anybody tells me they had a good childhood and it's not been explored at length, I worry about that. The joke that I tell is that when somebody tells me that they had a good childhood, I tell them that therapy can fix that. Because some people have really positive childhoods. That's true, but there's always something, right? There's always some messaging. There's always some programming. There's always something missing, even if on the balance it was a good childhood. And we have to be willing to look at it critically. If we're not willing to look at it critically, if we fall into that idea that, well, I don't want to blame, I don't want to be a victim, it's my responsibility. If we fall into that kind of thinking, my experience is that in many cases, we're still protecting the parent. The one common feature of dysfunctional families is that they all support the parent's ego, the idea that the parent is a good parent. But a parent who's done their work, a parent who's looked at themselves, a parent with self-awareness that has some increased level of consciousness, knows that they make lots of mistakes. Even if on balance their motivations were positive and they love their child and they showed up the best that they could, a person that is healed, a person that is growing, a person that is aware, recognizes absolutely there are lots of things that would make it difficult to be my child. There's lots of things that would make it difficult to be my partner or my spouse. That's just the essence of being human, really. Dr. Siegel goes on to say, research has clearly demonstrated that our children's attachment to us will be influenced by what happened to us when we were young if we do not come to process and understand those experiences. And even if we have come to understand ourselves well, our children will still make their own journey through life. Although we may supply them with a secure foundation through our own deeper self-understanding, notice that. Although we may supply them with a secure foundation through our own deeper self-understanding, our role as parents serves to support our children's development, not guarantee its outcome. So the thought, what he's alluding to here or hinting at, the thought that I can control my child, the thought that the parenting task is to shape the child up in the way that they need to be, that is the poison, not the cure. That belief that so many of us carry, that's the problem, really. The child experiences when the parent feels a significant responsibility for shaping the child up, several things happen to the child. Number one, they don't feel seen. They feel pressure. They feel responsibility to measure up to what the parents expect or want. And even if they tend to rebel and go against what we're teaching them, that rebellion can be seen as a symptom of that pressure, of that shame, and that guilt. So, healthy parenting is self awareness. Healthy parenting is your own healing. Healthy parenting is having a clear sense of self. There's so much about what I teach about in terms of attachment theory and parenting that sometimes that I talk about listening and containing and holding and not reacting. So much of the time, I think parents and people hear me suggesting the idea that you're supposed to just lay down and be a doormat. But it's quite the contrary, honestly. It is having a sense of self. It's knowing the answers to the questions that life throws at you. It's being able to stay present with your feelings. It's not being happy, it's having appropriate feelings for the situations, for the situation at hand, and being able to tolerate it. It's taking responsibility for your emotions and not putting them on others, your spouse, your children, with the idea or the statements like, "You're making me sad, you're making me scared, you're making it so that I can't sleep at night." When we take back the responsibility of our own life, when we live our life and we operate from that base, we are a better parent, a better partner, a better friend, a better sibling, a better child, a better employee, a better partner, a better employer, a better citizen. I talked about this idea about how attachment can become permanent. That sense of safety, that sense of knowing yourself can become permanent. And I basically broke it down into these three ideas. We feel safe when we are around somebody safe. Attachment theory explains that this can be internalized and essentially become permanent. When caregivers consistently provide resonance, safety, and security, regardless of the tragedies over which you have little to no control in some cases, right? Bad things can happen to your child. Bullying at school, sexual assault. They can have learning differences, which cause lots of stress and acting out issues, substance use, all kinds of things can happen to them. Health issues, accidents. When caregivers consistently provide resonance, safety, and security, regardless of tragedies over which they have no control, the child develops an internal base of safety they carry throughout life. The result of a secure attachment, if it's something that is earned later in life through therapy or the work, we call it an earned attachment. The result of a secure attachment or an earned attachment is a sense that one is home. It's safety, it's security. It's the feeling of I am okay. Poets and prophets have referred to this feeling as heaven. So now that we've talked about attachment and what it is and how it's developed and how we can participate in it, let's talk a little bit about this idea of parenting through the lens of attachment. First and foremost, like I said, it means developing a sense of self. Do not hear that this work that I describe is passive. It looks passive to people that are often dysregulated, that are reactive, that are in constant fight or flight mode. But it is by no means passive. It is built on the foundation of self, of who you are. And the way that we build that sense of self, if it didn't happen in childhood or to the extent that it didn't happen in childhood, we do it by learning our history, by unlearning the things that no longer serve us and our children, by developing an ability to self-soothe. It's not self-sacrifice. In the audacity to be you, this is the way that I said it. I said it's common to conflate love or loving too much with anxious attachment. Loving too much is a euphemism for the unhealed attachment wound and its expression in an anxious parent. The problem is not loving too much, but rather not enough self. In other words, if you find yourself constantly in an anxious relationship with your child and their struggles, afraid, dysregulated, anxious, depressed, overwhelmed, triggered, reactive, if you find yourself in those places, that's evidence of a lack of self, a lack of secure attachment in you, a lack of a secure base inside of you. When somebody doesn't have overall, when they don't have a secure attachment experience growing up in childhood, and they don't develop this base that they can carry around with them wherever they go, regardless of circumstances, then the most common response is they try to control the outside world because they can't feel safe inside. So if I can't feel safe inside, I have to make sure that nothing bad happens to me. And we parents value perhaps more than anything our children and their lives and their happiness and their safety. So where are we going to put that controlling energy? We're going to put it into controlling our children. And again, our children experience that control and then anxiety as uh, overwhelming, negative, upsetting, distasteful. They want to get away from it. They feel consumed by it, smothered by it. And we all do this. There are so many times when people come to me with their shame and their guilt about parenting mistakes and parenting issues. And my first instinct is to say, look, it's not that bad because I want to soothe their guilt and their shame because I know that very little positive comes from shame and guilt, almost nothing. But really what I would say is, yeah, yes, you made mistakes, more than some and less than others. And you've dented your child. No doubt about it. So what next? What do we do with that? Well, we do the work. We get into therapy, like my favorite quote from the novelist um, Anne Lamott. She said, "The greatest gift that we can offer our children is our own healing." For all of you that are watching or listening, that's it. If you do your healing, if you live your life, Carl Jung said it: the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of a parent. That's what he's talking about. It's not some great or elusive metaphor. It's taking the responsibility for your own happiness, your own meaning, your own well-being, instead of following that toxic adage that is so often offered as an ideal that you're only as happy as your least happy child. That adage is pathology at its base, at its heart. Children can't bear the burden of your life. They can't live your life. They can't be good so that you can sleep at night. It doesn't work that way. We have to. And if our children are struggling, we have to gather resources, information, therapy, support, podcasts, books, meditation, skills, tools. We have to gather all of that. We have to build a network around us. We have to learn to find our peace, our serenity somewhere else. We can't go to the child and get it from them. That's what caused the damage, the most fundamental damage in the first place. We go somewhere else. And nobody taught me this, right? I had to learn it by failure, just like the rest of us. I'm still learning it by failure, if I'm being honest. I have to take my responsibility of living my life so that I can show up to my child and not need them to be a certain way so that I'm okay. That's the work. That's the fundamental idea. And it's still once you get to that point, once you parent through the attachment lens, it's still very, very difficult because now you have to face your shame and your guilt, right? Now you have to learn to let go and to learn to grieve, to be sad, to hurt. You have to feel all of your feelings. But because you've developed this base, this capacity, and this network of resources and skills and tools and people, you have places to feel, places to share it. I've said this before, but we often, in fact, at the end of every broadcast, I encourage all of our current parents to try 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups, and I talk about Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous and Families Anonymous and Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I say this to people in coaching and therapy sometimes, and people will come back to me after trying it once and say, "I didn't really get it. Everybody was just complaining." And my response often is, "Yeah, that's right. That's the right place to complain. If you can complain enough there in the right way there, you won't be complaining to your child. You won't be adding to whatever mental health struggles they have. You won't be adding on top of it your displeasure, your upset, your anxiety, your anger, frustration, disappointment. Parenting through the attachment lens, Daniel Siegel talks about this in his book, is the ability to mentalize, to see, to put yourself in your child's shoes. See, the person that thinks that they just had a good childhood and that they're doing a pretty good job, that it's not their problem, that the child's the one with the problem, that they're doing fine, that kind of parent can't see outside of themselves. They like the fish is the last to discover water. They can only see things from their perspective. So mentalizing is part of that parenting lens. And that's difficult because for so many of us codependents, our empathy, we so strongly identify with the other person that we lose ourselves, we lose our values, we lose our courage when we over identify. Mentalizing is something different. We still can remain separate, but we can see the world through their lens, through their eyes. If you have the attachment lens, you'll have greater empathy and non-judgment. I'm really liking what I'm seeing with the trauma work that's out there, specifically Gabor Mate. He wasn't saying this long ago, but he's talking very clearly about the fact that to heal the trauma, they've done a great job of identifying the trauma, but to heal the trauma, you have to spend time with a really compassionate, non-judgmental, curious adult therapist, healer. So if you borrow from that model and take it to the family, that's what we practice being. But again, because we are so triggered by our children's pain and potential failure and difficulties, that's not easy. And you have to work at it. You know, when I was a younger therapist, in fact, if you would go back and probably listen to some of my very old podcasts, I don't even think they exist anymore. But back in the early 2000s, I would have emphasized quite often this idea that good behavior is the priority over the relationship. I wouldn't have said it that clearly, but I would have said things like, it's okay if the child hates you as long as they are happy and well. And there's bits of truth in that. But now when I think about parenting through the lens, I think about how important the relationship is. I was talking to my oldest daughter not too long ago, and as my youngest daughter was having some challenges, my oldest daughter was expressing anxiety about someday being a mother and what it would be like if your child had the problems that children have these days. And I said to her, just in the moment, I said, the one thing that makes me feel okay underneath all of these challenges that we're beginning to have as we enter adolescence with my youngest is that the relationship is good. She knows that I care. She knows that I can be accountable and apologize. She knows that when push comes to shove, I don't have all the answers. She knows that I'm human. She can be upset. She can be angry. We can both be human together and make mistakes. And when she's in stress, she can come to me. I talk about this idea that you want to be your child's first call in a crisis. You don't want to be their fifth call. You ideally would want to be their first call. In other words, you want them to call you in a moment when instead of gasping with anxiety or fear or terror, you can remain calm. There's going to be no "I told you so" energy. There's going to be no disappointment. There's going to be no overwhelming or extreme expression of emotion. You're going to be patient. Things are going to slow down. So now when I talk about the lens of attachment, I'm talking about constantly working on your sense of self and connection. Your sense of self and connection. And slow down. Don't be quick to make decisions. They're not as important as the relationship. as the attunement, as the co-regulation. I've said for years, when your child earns enough money that they're not reliant on you, you want them to come and visit because home is a great place to be, not out of some obligation that they're supposed to come home and visit parents, but because they feel comfortable being home. That's one of the things that I'm maybe most proud of as a father is that my children are comfortable being close, spending time with us as they grow into adulthood. And by the way, they can leave freely anytime they want. They can go away as long as they want. And one of the reasons they can go away as long as they want, there's two reasons really. Number one, because I have a full life, as does my wife. We have things that excite us, that give us meaning. In both of our cases, it happens to be being psychotherapists. So we have a life that is full. So we're not waiting on our children. That's the first thing that makes the difference in their life. But the second thing that allows me to say they can go away is I know that they need to. I know that's part of differentiating, of their own individuation, of their own journey. They have to go away. And I love the idea that when we give our suffering, our pain, meaning, we can bear it. So even though at times when my children have gone all over the country for school and have spent some significant time away from us, what has allowed me to do that? Number one, like I said, is my life is full. Number two is I know that they need it. And when I know that they need it, then I know as a dad, I'm parenting. And that gives my sadness for their absence meaning. So prioritizing the relationship over good behavior is essentially, maybe if there were one tagline to this broadcast, it would be that. Parenting through the attachment lens, means always working on the relationship, means always working on your sense of self and your own serenity at the same time. Parenting through the attachment lens means dealing with paradox, dealing with dialectics, that two things can be both true and opposites at the same time. The classic example of a dialectic is at any given time, you're doing the best you can and you can do better. Both of those things are true at the same time. Parenting through the attachment lens means dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity. In fact, in a sense, a significant measure of our mental health could be how willing or how able we are to bear ambiguity, uncertainty, and paradox, dialectics. Under stress, the human psyche tends to reduce things down to simple good and bad, either or. Some of you have heard of the diagnosis borderline personality disorder. There's also something called a borderline defense, which is just the behavior, not necessarily the disorder, the full diagnosed disorder. The borderline defense is turning everything into a simple binary, all or nothing, good or bad, either or, black or white, right or wrong. When in reality, virtually most of life is filled with the gray. Most of the great movies and stories that we read teach us that lesson. We often learn in our stories that the hero is not all good and that the villain is not all bad. And that oftentimes we're not choosing between a right and a wrong solution. We're choosing between a better wrong decision. And at the highest extent of this principle, we get out of right and wrong altogether. We get out of good and bad altogether. And we start talking about being a person, being a self. In other words, like I talk about in the Audacity to Be You, the goal is the idea is in this work, you don't get to win anymore. You don't get to be good anymore. The idea, the hope to be a good parent is lost. You just get to be a person, which is so much better, so much more liberating. And the great paradox with that is you're more loving, you're more kind, you're more generous. I read a quote today that I really, really loved about this. It's kind of a little bit different. It said, righteousness, this is from Ram Dass, righteousness ultimately starves you to death. If you want to be free more than you want to be right, you have to let go of righteousness, of being right. Being right will cause separation, will show up like a lack of love, will often show up like abuse, cruelty, unkindness. Whereas being a person means that I get to be me and you get to be you, and hopefully we get to be connected. And I know that's subtle and sounds very metaphorical, but maybe most simply, it's just about giving up the idea that there's one right way to do things. When I do parent coaching, for example, I talk about this a bit. Uh, I don't tell people what to do. When I do therapy, I don't tell people what to do. I talk about the principles involved. I talk about the pros and cons of each. I talk about what I think tends to work as a principle. But you have to figure this out. And part of your figuring it out is you have to make mistakes. The experience of being human is trial and error. I was watching a quote from Orson Welles the other day, an old interview from Orson Welles, and somebody was asking him about regrets, and he was saying, "I can't understand people that say that I don't have regrets." He said, "I would live my life so much differently." I think I understand what he's talking about. However, when I think about regrets, it's hard for me to regret things because they taught me the principle, the idea that I'm now using to regret it. Does that make sense? Most every important truth that I know in my body came at least in part from making mistakes. And that's why I've decided with my youngest to let her make more mistakes than I did my oldest. Very clearly, very consciously. I've decided to prioritize the relationship more. And she's still a teenager, so the jury's still out, but I decided in my experiment of being a father that I'm going to live this idea that research and theorists and psychologists and philosophers and spiritual teachers have been teaching for thousands of years. I'm going to focus on connecting and attunement and being safe and regulating my own nervous system, worrying less about good and bad choices and mistakes. And you know what? Our teenagers and teenagers that end up in our program, they can put this to the test, right? They can absolutely put this to the test. And if you have one of those children, that's why you need more and more work done. You need more and more support, more and more therapy, more and more support groups and tools and skills. It means developing an earned attachment, parenting through the attachment lens, which means working on your attachment, understanding about your anxiety, your need to control, what you do with fear, how you process shame and guilt. I know this isn't going to make sense. I remember years ago when I was younger, I was talking to my clinical team, and we'd had this debate for years about everybody agreed that shame was essentially toxic at its core. But there were still some people that were talking about how guilt can be good. And I just said, look, after years, I just said, the debate is over. I'm not going to argue about this anymore in our program. The fact of the matter is that guilt causes you to do things that are wrong just as often as it causes you to do things that are right. In fact, I would argue it causes the wrong decision more often. So many, numberless times in psychotherapy, somebody has said to me, I knew the right thing to do, but I didn't do it. And my response is, why? And they say, because I felt guilty. I was afraid I couldn't control the situation. We're so afraid to let go of guilt because we think it's going to lead to hedonism and selfishness and cruelty. And it's just the opposite. That's what Ram Dass is talking about. If you're acting from a place of trying to be a good parent, you're doing it for your ego. When you give up good and bad and right and wrong, what comes out of you is just your spirit. You're doing it from love. So everything you've been told to be afraid of on the dark side, This comes from the philosopher Alan Watts. He said, once we realized that there was nothing on the dark side to be afraid of, nothing is left but love. People that are healed, people that are in recovery, don't operate from guilt and shame. They can set boundaries that are healthy. They can do self-care. They can say no. They can stick to their values and their beliefs, and they don't have to argue or prove it or debate it to anybody. And isn't this what you're trying to teach your child? Guys, there's so much work to do. Me too. I'm still in the middle of it. There's so much work to do. And the work is its own reward. So developing an earned attachment means looking at your childhood, doing your work, coming to a place of security. Response flexibility is a huge part of the attachment lens. That means that you're not in fight or flight during a moment, during a crisis, during an argument. I was thinking about this today as I was preparing this. My youngest, because she gets so much exposure to all these principles, she has said to me, she hasn't had the need to lately, but she has said to me in the past few years, she'll say, your nervous system is dysregulated. You're very dysregulated, Dad. You need a timeout. And I want to yell at her. I want to argue with her, which would just prove her point. But she's basically saying, I don't feel safe, and you're an adult and you need to take care of yourself. And I hate being told that because, first of all, my nervous system at that moment is dysregulated. And when you're dysregulated, you don't have insight. You don't have access to insight. You're not thinking reasonable. You're thinking in terms of fight or flight, operating from the reptilian brain, the lower part of your brain. And you're operating from a place of survival. And it takes time or a timeout or some soothing to get your prefrontal cortex back online, to get the part of your brain back online that makes decisions wisely, calmly, with an ability to see the future and anticipate consequences. So response flexibility is what happens when we do our healing. I used to talk about this. If you're not a sports fan, forgive this. But I was, for many years, I was a big fan of the NFL, not so much anymore, the National Football League. But there was a very common, even to this day, there's a very common thing that athletes say when they move from college football to professional football. You can ask anybody who knows sports, what's the biggest difference between college football and professional football? And they will inevitably answer with the speed. The speed of things is a lot faster in the pros. A quarterback, for example, when a quarterback takes a snap, he has about 3.5 seconds or so on average before a 280-pound, 6'4" freak of an athlete is going to hit him at full speed. Now, if you or I were sitting in the backfield of a football game and we took a snap and there were two guys running at us, it would happen. It would go like that in an instant. We would panic immediately, right? But the good ones, through practice, through study, through repetition, that 3.5 seconds looks and feels like 10 seconds to them. They see everything. Everything slows down. In sports, they call that being in the zone. Everything slows down. Everything gets quiet. That's the ultimate of response flexibility. You have access to all of your resources, all of your creativity, all of your best decision making. And when you're parenting through the attachment lens, that is your goal. So you will take a timeout. You will pause a conversation. You will use, I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to sleep on this. I've always said that the worst advice that I hear given to newly married couples is don't go to bed angry. Oh my gosh. That is the worst advice. Virtually everybody that I've treated for domestic violence believed that you shouldn't go to bed angry. In other words, they thought that they had to resolve it tonight and they put the pressure on themselves. Go to bed angry. Relax your nervous system. Give it some rest. Sleep, food, time, breathing. Take responsibility for that. You're the adult. No matter how the child shows up, you're the adult. It's your responsibility. And again, I'm not picking on you. When I say you, I mean me, we. This is our responsibility. This is our work. Ultimately, parenting through the parenting lens, the attachment lens, is to understand that our children's nervous system gets wired in large part as a reflection of our nervous system. We call that co-regulation. When a little child falls and scrapes their knee, what do? They look for the parent. They want to see if the parent is upset or scared. They look for that to find out how they're supposed to feel. And while that's the most obvious example of co-regulation, this happens dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of times per day. So we regulate our nervous system. We take care of our anxiety, our stress, our anger, our disappointment, our grief. We take care of those things so that we can provide a safe context for our children. And we make those the goal. And you'll start to get to the point where behavior, even behavior that used to alarm you, doesn't alarm you. And when that starts to happen, it's magic. Your child does something that maybe your older child, like me, did years ago that would have freaked you out. You would have levied all kinds of consequences in rapid succession. And now you take a pause and you realize something's more important: attachment, the relationship, the co regulation, your sense of self, your ability to be creative, your ability to slow things down, your knowing that everything is not a life and death situation. That if they fail a test, it doesn't mean they're going to end up in the gutter. That if they fail a grade, it doesn't mean their life is over. That if they get arrested for shoplifting, that you know what? Kids do that sometimes. On and on and on. It doesn't mean that you do nothing. It just means you're not operating from fear. You're not operating from fight or flight. I made this list in the Audacity to Be You. I call it the safe and unsafe list. It's really about what attachment looks like. The words aren't it. This is not attachment, but it's an energy. On the safe side of the ledger, I've written responses like, thank you for telling me. Tell me more. I appreciate knowing. Thanks. That sounds hard. I'm sorry. I'm here. I'm listening. You're not alone. That makes sense. Is there anything I can do? You must have a good reason. I want to understand. How can I support you? I can relate. Those are safe. That's a safe kind of energy. Those are the kinds of things that somebody who's got a regulated nervous system would sound like, how they'd react to scary or difficult disclosure or news. Conversely, an anxious attachment sounds like, that is silly. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. You're scaring me. You're selfish. You should, and then fill in the blank. Don't pay them any mind. Don't pay them any mind. They're just jealous. Ignore them. You'll get over it. Look on the bright side. Why did you do that? Have you tried XYZ? That was not my intention. See, that was not my intention. My daughter helped me add that one after I made this list originally. It's not in the book because I said it one time. And she said, Dad, intentions doesn't matter. I know you want to be a good dad. I know it's really important for you to be a good dad, she said. But regardless of your intention and your hope, you screwed up and did the wrong thing. And she's right. So that was not my intention, made it onto the list of unsafe responses. Statements like that's just your depression, that's your insecurity, that's your anxiety, that's your thinking error, that's your distorted reasoning, that's your narcissism, that's your defense, that's your rationalization, that's your just diagnosing them can be an example of an unsafe response. I've taught the staff in our program, I don't confront people on justification or rationalizing. I show up in a way that they don't feel threatened and they don't feel like they have to rationalize or have to justify. And that takes time. So the kinds of questions I would encourage you to ask yourself if you're hoping to parent with this attachment focus is, how can I maintain and improve my connection with my child without losing myself? Can I see their behaviors with curiosity rather than judgment, fear, shame, or anger? Can I own my own distress, my own feelings, and take responsibility for my own serenity? Do I know my shortcomings and mental health challenges? What part is my ego, the want, the want or need to be good, to be right, or to win, playing in this? Do I use shame and guilt and my feelings to try to manage my child's behaviors? I've said this many times. The most common mistake that parents make, in my observation, is when they share their feelings of pride or disappointment, happiness or um, discouragement with their children in an attempt to manage the child's behavior. That's what I did. That's what I still do sometimes. But that was my conscious effort coming into parenting 31 years ago. I thought I'm just going to tell my children how I feel in a very calm, assertive way, using the skills that I've been taught in graduate school. And I thought if I say it this way, then my children will know right and wrong. But let's pick that apart. That's crazy. I'm teaching my children that if I'm happy and proud, they're doing the right thing. If I'm scared or upset, they're doing the wrong thing. That's just not true all the time. First of all, I don't know everything. Second of all, there are times when I'm triggered by stuff that has nothing to do with right or wrong. And those feelings are my responsibility. And if I, like most of us, wire my children to believe that they're responsible for my feelings, that my feelings are merely the result of their actions, and then we wonder in adolescence why they're so susceptible and vulnerable to peer pressure, well, the answer is because we wired it into them. We were the first peers in the peer pressure game. And I think that that idea is almost universal in our culture, especially among educated parents. When you get into Al Anon, you learn one of the slogans that they often quote is, "What other people think about me is none of my business." That includes your parents. I operate today from the place that I am making no efforts to make my parents proud. I don't even have the same values as my parents. Some I do, but many I don't. I don't want my children trying to make me proud. I have lots of blind spots and things that I don't know or understand. I'm not all knowing. I'm not God. I'm just a human being bumbling through this life like anybody else. And if children learn because their parents teach them, they indoctrinate them into this idea that what other people's feelings that other people's feelings are about them, they'll walk around in the world with no sense of self, being blown on the wind of other people's opinions. They'll end up in relationships that are toxic. They'll end up in dynamics and situations that are unsafe. They won't know what their needs are and who they are. So again, we have to take back responsibility for our own feelings and our serenity, our own mental health issues, our own ego. The last question is, am I doing my work? Not to figure out how to better manipulate my child, but to develop this sense of safety inside of my own body. As am I doing that work? I love this. I'll end with this quote from Carl Jung. He said, "The spiritual journey is not a career or a success story. It is a series of small humiliations of the false self that become more and more profound." The process of living and learning is humiliating. It's humbling. Things that I thought and believed and were sure of years ago, I'm not so sure of anymore. Somebody recently said to me that they're becoming less sure of themselves in the way that I'm describing. And my thought is, I think that that's enlightenment. Holding an open mind. I still have to make decisions. I still have to draw a line. I still have to be a self, but not from a place of right or wrong, good or bad. From a place of, this is my best guess. This is what I feel comfortable with. And if we can teach and model that way of being to our children, they won't end up in those toxic, scary, unhealthy situations. They'll be able to walk away. And when somebody tries to guilt them or talk them or shame them out of walking away, they'll simply say, or maybe even more accurately, they'll simply know that, you know what, in our family, you didn't have to be right to set a boundary. You didn't have to prove yourself. You just got to decide. And that's why it makes it so difficult to parent, is because we're trying to foster that sense of independence, of differentiation, of individuation, which is difficult and messy, up and down, back and forth, sideways and backwards again. Even in situations where the child is developing perfectly well, there are going to be lots of mistakes and lots of messes. And we have to develop a largeness. In Jungian psychology, ego is the opposite of soul. Soul is the authentic self, the deepest knowing, the wise self, the self that comes from love and confidence and clarity, and not from fear and shame and guilt. So we have to become larger. This is a process of expansion. And I'll just end with this idea, and with all of this, the children are here to teach us, not the other way around. The child is the teacher, and we are the student. And the sooner and more fully we accept that idea, the better it'll be for everybody. All right, folks. As mentioned, we encourage all parents to attend, just try out 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon.org, Coda.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also try RefugeRecovery.org, which is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program with less of an emphasis on a higher power. You can also access the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, which has free classes and resources in your local communities. We have announced recently our partnership with Other Parents Like Me. Other Parents Like Me is an online platform built on the foundation of parents supporting parents. They provide 17 weekly Zoom meetings designed for caregivers of teens and young adults facing mental health challenges, led by trained parent facilitators. This is an authentic and safe community where parents actively engage, support each other, and find valuable resources. For a 1-month premium membership for a free 1-month premium membership, use the code FINDINGYOU, and they'll give you a free month. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to do a deep dive in your own work, I believe the best investment you can make in your life, in yourself, and your family, and in your children, Finding You is that offering. June 19th through 23rd, that one is going to fill up. It's going to be full soon. So June 19th through 23rd is the next offering. And then we have the online offerings there. May 17th through 19th. One spot just opened up. Somebody had to drop out for personal reasons. So I believe there might be a spot. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com to find out more. We're also doing a New York Finding You this summer, July 31st through August 4th. I'll be reading that one. I'll be leading that one. That will be the only Finding You that I will be leading in 2024. So July 31st through August 4th. If you live in the New York tri-state area, it's a wonderful opportunity. If not, plan a trip to New York to see and do some fun things and spend some time at our Finding You intensives. You can contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have support groups each week for current and alumni families, parent members. May 16th at 7 p.m. is the next offering. Once a month, we have an alumni parent only meeting. May 20th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. And for our intensives and coaching clients and alumni, June 10th at 6 p.m. is your support group. Contact support groups at evoketherapy.com for more. If you want to coach somebody that can help you with parenting, with couples, with stage of life, anxiety, depression, the attachment stuff that I'm talking about, contact coaching at evoketherapy.com to get matched up with a coach. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just go to your favorite podcast app and just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. Like us, subscribe there, and you'll be notified when the new episodes drop. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there, or you can go to Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the video rebroadcasts of these. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And of course, our Evoke Intensives is on Instagram with the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then our blog on our website has wonderful content each week. I'm going to be back on Thursday night. I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be taking live questions. You can always email questions in between, even if you're not a current parent or you don't watch these live. You can send in a request or a question to webinar@evoketherapy.com. If you want copies of the slides, if you want copies of these slides, webinar@evoketherapy.com is the place to reach out. All right, folks, I hope this was a helpful point of contact for you all. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up to these and being willing to do your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you Thursday night. Take care. Bye-bye.